Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth here, HurricaneTrack.com, with your Hurricane and Hurricane HD video blog for the 19th of October, 2012. Let's take a look at the cloud shot of the Western Atlantic Basin first. And I think you can notice that there's now an increase in shower and thunderstorm activity in the Caribbean Sea. There's also a similar increase in the Southeast Pacific. And this is all part of that favorable MJO pattern spreading its way across the Western Hemisphere, and that will enhance and promote this shower and thunderstorm activity, or convection. I think what you'll notice over the next several days is that it becomes markedly more noticeable here in the Western Caribbean, and eventually will develop a very broad area of low pressure down here, what we refer to as a monsoon gyre, fancy way of saying broad area of low pressure. And that's good and bad. It's good because it's harder to get one singular intense hurricane out of something like that. It's bad because you get a large area of heavy rainfall that can persist across a region for quite some time. And you have those mountainous areas of Hispaniola, for example, that really don't need 10 to 20 inches of rain over a 3 to 4 day time period. That's just not good. So if you look at the GFS over the next week, this is valid now tomorrow morning, and you can see overall just a very broad area of low pressure down here with different small, weak low centers extending from the Caribbean over into the Eastern Pacific. And this type of a pattern, like I said, it makes it tougher for something to bundle the energy and sort of take off, leading the pack as an intense hurricane. It's not impossible, but it's usually harder because you have such a large area of competing energy spread out over quite a wide geographic region. This is now Sunday morning. We go to Monday and Tuesday, and you can see that the overall pattern is for this broad, sort of just counterclockwise, if you can just draw in just a little bit there, use your imagination, that you just have this large area of cyclonic spin sitting down there in the Caribbean. But then on day 5, maybe one low pressure area will sort of take over and start to head off to the northeast here, going across portions of the greater Antilles, and we can see that on day 6 spreading heavy precip over Hispaniola, which is right here. So a very wet pattern coming up potentially for these islands down here, eastern Cuba, Hispaniola, maybe even Puerto Rico. And finally at day 7, the GFS wanting to develop a little bit stronger area of low pressure here, albeit very large in scale, really extending out over a wide area, not bundling that energy. So we're not looking at a hurricane here. This is more of a broad low pressure center, maybe a depression at this point. Pressure is kind of low at 1,003 there. Now what the models are showing in the extended range, just want to point this out, is there's a possibility that one of these low pressure areas will develop and head off to the northeast here, and then another one will develop and kind of hang back towards the peninsula of Florida as we get a huge high that comes out over the northeast to kind of block it. So these two would split, and then this low pressure pattern would persist and acting like an incubator, spawning off maybe 1 or 2 separate areas of low pressure. So Florida may have a period of time as well beyond the week time frame that we're looking at here, where it's wet and windy due to the low pressure down where Florida is, and then the high pressure coming off of New England. You get that pressure gradient. So that's going to be something to look at, especially as we get into next week, and then those days become closer into the forecasting time frame where it's a little bit more believable, not so far out in time and subject to more chaos than anything. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Basically, the farther out in time you get, this makes total sense, I'm sure, that the less believable the forecast can be. But for the next week, I think it's going to be wet, and generally just that large low pressure area in the Caribbean spreading that precip over the greater Antilles, and people need to be ready for that. Tropical rainfall can be a big problem. So that's a look at the tropics for today. I'll be back all throughout the weekend with updates each of those days. I'm Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, my website. Always a privilege and a pleasure to do these videos for you on Hurricane and Hurricane HD. I'll be back throughout the weekend to continue that Saturday and Sunday.